Oh, hello, everyone. Once again, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Thank you for your patience at the beginning as we were ensuring quorum for the evening. This is new to us. This is our very first Zoom meeting. So any hiccups that we might have encountered, thank you so much for helping us get this going. And yeah, as Laura said, this is the fun part. I'm really excited for tonight's presentation, so might as well just launch right into it. The shores of Lake Ontario have provided food and a means of transportation for centuries. It was explored and settled, and today it offers a quiet place of rest and recreation. Lakeview Park officially opened as a public park in late September 1920, and its 100 years as a park has seen celebrations, picnics, history preserved, and wild weather. In keeping with the online exhibit that was created to celebrate this milestone, this presentation will be divided into 3 themes: Before the Park, Lakeview Park, and the Park Today. And if you haven't had a chance to check out the online exhibit, which has been created by the team here at the museum, highly recommend. Not that I'm trying to toot our own horn, but I think we did a pretty good job with this online exhibit, and it can be found at lakeviewparkoshawa.wordpress.com. As well, throughout the presentation, we will share lakefront memories, reminiscences shared as part of the 2001 Oral History Project, documenting different aspects of what life was like at Oshawa on the lake. And this presentation is a combination of writing and research from all of the Oshawa Museum staff. It truly is a reflection of our teamwork here. Long before the waterfront became Lakeview Park, the area was hunting grounds for early settlers. Let's take a look at aspects of what this area looked like, what it was used for, and what set the groundwork for this to become Lakeview Park. From the earliest days, this land was part of the traditional hunting and fishing grounds of the Mississauga. The creek was a vital part of the carrying route that connected the interior to Lake Ontario and allowed for easier movement between the two. The creek was not only an important transportation route, it was also a vital food source, and the spring and fall would see large groups congregate to fish salmon. Initial contact between the local Indigenous communities and Europeans was a period of transient contact and came in the form of French and English explorers and then French fur traders. During this period, French traders and the local communities interacted largely on a business level, with several large local history publications referring to a French fur trading post apparently located near the Oshawa Harbor. While the French fur traders moved throughout the area in the 1700s, they did not permanently settle here. The first settlers to move into the area arrived here in the late 1790s. They were known as late Loyalists, and they moved up north after the American Revolution looking for free or cheap land. And they worked to clear the land to build a home and began setting up a farm. The early settlers also made use of the carrying routes to move inland from the lake and take possession of the land. One of the first American settlers to build a home in what is now today's Lakeview Park was a man, and I'm really sorry if I mispronounce his name, was a man named Eliza Lockwood. Lockwood arrived in the area from Vermont with Benjamin Wilson in 1794. He worked to clear the area along the lakeshore of Lake Ontario and was granted the deed to Lot 7 of the Broken Front concession on May 8, 1812. And when I'm talking about Lot 7, that's the little gray shaded area on the map. In 1815, the Henry family purchased the 200 acres of Lot 7 on the Broken Front from Lockwood and began farming. The Henrys not only farmed the land, but they also planted a large apple orchard. The land, and again, you can see from the map, it remained in the Henry family for decades as various family members farmed different portions of the 200-acre lot. While the majority of the park is located on Lot 7, the easternmost part of the park is actually on Lot 6 of the Broken Front. This section includes the harbor, as well as both Robinson and Guy House of the museum. The written history of the lot began on May 19, 1821, when the patent for 200 acres of land was granted to Charles Annis after John McGann died. Just 2 years later, Charles sold the 200 acres to Levi Annis. The complete 200-acre lot was sold 2 other times before we start seeing it being divided up and sold. By the 1840s, people buying up parcels of this land included John Shipman, John Robinson, and it was on that parcel that he built Robinson House, or that he had Robinson House built. And the Sydenham Harbour Company first appears in the land registry records in 1847. The Guy name does not appear in the records until 1861, when a quarter acre was sold to James O. Guy by Samuel Phillips, and half an acre was sold to him by Daniel Conant. The end of the 1800s saw the arrival of another well-known Oshawa business. In 1894, the Oshawa Sydenham Company transferred, through an agreement, a part of their land to the Rathbun Company, and the Rathbuns began the Oshawa Railway Company. It was actually the small portion of Lot 6 that was first used for recreation purposes. The area by the harbor was a popular summertime hangout, with the beach becoming crowded with people looking to escape the heat, not too uncommon from how it is generally today. As early as 1890, the area by the lake, referred to more generally as Oshawa on the Lake, was used for summer recreation. The street railway transported beachgoers with 11 trips per day for a fare of just 5 cents, and this was considered to be inexpensive even in those times. The last trip back to town was just after 10 p.m. However, with businessmen having built summer homes down here, there were places to stay overnight. A popular place in those days was Mallory's Hall, owned by a resident by the lake who rented it out for dancing, concerts, or religious events. And we're going to talk about the pavilions in just a little bit. By 1920, Lakeview Park had been hunting grounds, farmland, and the beginnings of the lakefront as recreation had started to take hold. I love this picture up on the screen. Just please enjoy its whimsy. On July 16, 1920, approximately 44 acres of lakefront property was sold to the town of Oshawa from General Motors of Canada for $1. This incredible deal was contingent on one condition: that the land become parkland only and that it remain so. While the area along the lakeshore had been used as a park, this gift made the area public parkland and accessible to all. The company also forwarded a check for $3,000 to cover initial improvements and another $6,000 for a suitable park playground. A parks board was created to manage the development of the area. One of the first tasks undertaken by the Parks Board was the selection of a name for the new park. Approximately 240 names were submitted, and Lakeview Park was chosen. Although open for use by the public in August of 1920, the park was officially opened in late September by Mayor Stacy, with music provided by the Oshawa bands and free streetcar rides to the park provided by the Oshawa Railway Company. Riding the ocean wave. In the early years of the 20th century, a man named Jack O'Leary owned the New Lunch O'Leary's restaurant, and that was located at 37 King Street West in Oshawa, between the Commercial Hotel and the coal yards at Centre Street. Behind this small restaurant, there was a semi-permanent wipeout style of carnival ride, which Oshawa residents fondly remember as the Ocean Wave. By 1912, O'Leary also owned and operated a refreshment stand at the east side of what would become Barnharts Pavilion, and O'Leary had the Ocean Wave move from downtown to an area behind the pavilion, and then shortly after it was moved one final time to in front of the pavilion. The center construction was a steel frame pyramid with cross mounts that children would try to climb. Lakefront Memories participant Linda Bazowski told us, quote, "I remember it when the riding part of it was buried in the sand. We used to climb the center of the structure. It was well designed, the metal bars were far apart, and the X design made it impossible for children to climb." End quote. It was possible, however, for older kids or young men to climb through. At the top of the pyramid was a metal plate that spun on a central point, perhaps on a bearing. The ropes or wires attached to the top of the metal plate and the bottom to metal braces. The ride could accommodate upwards of 30 people. With the Lakefront Memories Project, almost everyone had some sort of memory of the ocean wave. Betty McAnally explained, quote, "Everyone pushed as hard as they could to get it into motion, and then you jumped on and it would dip and dive as it circled," end quote. Another participant shared, quote, "It could be dangerous," which, if I may add, I think might be a bit of an understatement looking at that ride, but that's just me. But I digress. It could be dangerous. People would come to dance at the Barney's Pavilion, Barnharts, and would often sit on the ocean wave. The girls would sit there while the guys got it going. Often you would hear a yelp when someone got their legs caught. Often people would sit with their legs inside the circle. This is when the legs got caught. To properly sit on the ocean wave, you had to sit with your legs on the outside, end quote. Apparently, the young men did not always play nice, as told by Elmer Eady, quote, "If you could get several people together on one side, it would throw the balance off," end quote. Some people remember damage to the ocean wave after the White Hurricane of 1913 and Hurricane Hazel in 1954. In the 1960s, the city of Oshawa purchased Barnharts Pavilion and with it the ocean wave, both of which were torn down in 1968. In early 1924, an application was submitted to request the loan of 3 buffaloes, 2 cows, and 1 bull for Lakeview Park. The idea for a zoo at Lakeview Park was first proposed by George W. McLaughlin, who agreed to cover all expenses related to the relocation and transportation of the buffalo. A $900 bond accompanied the application to guarantee that the buffalo would be well cared for here in Oshawa. With the application submitted, the construction of a buffalo house and corral located to the northwest of the historic Henry House began. Another Lakefront Memories participant, Douglas Mackey, shared, quote, "A monstrous chain link fence was erected when the buffalo were brought to the lakefront. The fence was about 7 feet high. A house was also constructed for the buffalo," end quote. By the early 1930s, the excitement of having the buffalo here in Lakeview Park was starting to wear off just a wee bit. Visitors to the park complained that the animals looked a little disheveled and that their odor wafted through the park, particularly on days when there was a breeze. In the interest and the welfare of the buffalo and park visitors, a decision was made to relocate the buffalo. As you can imagine, there was a great deal of excitement in Oshawa on August 20th, 1931, when the buffalo were to be moved. It was estimated there were 300 to 400 people in attendance that day. All seemed to be going according to schedule when suddenly a bull buffalo broke free of his crate and scattered the crowd. Newspaper reports from the day described people climbing trees and posts, seeking shelter behind vehicles, and climbing to the tops of sheds to escape this angry buffalo. Fortunately, no one was injured. However, one man was very nearly gored when he tripped and fell in front of the angry buffalo. Again, we can look to the memories of Douglas Mackey, quote, "The day the buffalo were being shipped out was quite a day. They didn't know how they were going to catch the buffalo. On the moving of the bull, he got away. At the time, there was a crowd of spectators watching the whole procedure. As the bull was running, one man ran out to scare him, but the buffalo ran after him instead. The man was running and screaming for his life," end quote. The buffalo was lassoed and placed in a hastily constructed but much stronger crate. The era of buffalo in Lakeview Park came to an end with 3 of the animals being taken to the Dominion Experimental Farm in Ottawa and the remaining 3 being sent to a zoo in Toronto. one constant in Lakeview Park has been the pavilions. Well before Lakeview Park officially opened, there was a pavilion by the beach. Barnharts Pavilion, located where the beach parking lot is today, was established in 1920, the same year as Lakeview Park's opening, but it had several owners before William and Viola Barnhart began operating this pavilion. One of the earliest known owners was a man named Charles Mallory. By the 1890s, Mallory's Hall was a popular place, often rented out for dancing, concerts, or religious events. He owned not only the hall, but also a number of cottages by the lake. In 1896, Mallory's Hall was vandalized when he, quote, left the windows open and several of the young men campers took possession of the hall to hold a stag party after having their midnight bath. They were enjoying themselves immensely until Mr. Mallory appeared on the scene with a lamp in hand, end quote. While the partiers appeared to escape, the situation upset Mallory, who wanted warrants for their arrest. Apparently, with keeping their nightgowns over their face, it left only a, quote, section of their anatomy as could not be readily identified on oath, end quote. A week later, Mr. Mallory was advertising for sale his pavilion, cottage, stock in trade consisting of use of North Cots Park at 50 cents on the dollar. He was quite upset, that Mr. Mallory. And if a sale could not be reached, he was ready to turn his pavilion into cottages. It appears that time did help to soothe his temper, as the editor remarked that, quote, shirt-tail parades these warm nights are something not to be despised, end quote. The pavilion opened again in 1897, operated again by Mr. Mallory. He tried to sell again in 1902, this time stating his bad health as the reason for the sale. At some point, it appears that the pavilion by the lake was operated by Arthur D. Henry, one of Thomas Henry's grandsons. Henry was already an experienced restaurant and park operator, as his name often appeared in the Oshawa on the Lake articles alongside Mallory during the 1890s. In 1920, the Barnharts purchased the property at the lakefront, consisting of a dance hall, 16 rooms for campers, boats, and 20 cottages. Barnharts became a well-known hangout for the Oshawa locals and campers. The Barnharts held dances in the pavilion and rented out 4 apartments and cottages. The Barnharts also resided in one of the cottages. They were also well known for their ice cream parlor and snack bar. Betty McAnally of Oshawa recalls purchasing all sorts of 1-cent treats at Barnharts, such as licorice babies, hard-hars, and marshmallow cones. Mrs. Helen Hill of Oshawa recalls Mr. Barnhart taking people over to his boathouse to launch his yacht, where he would then take them on a ride. During the 1930s and early 1940s, Barnharts held square dances at their pavilion. They were able to keep their business alive during the 1930s and finish paying for the lakefront property by 1943. By 1951, Mr. Barnhart suffered a severe heart attack while shoveling ice from their sidewalk. In 1953, he caught a serious illness, and unfortunately, he passed away in October of 1954. In 1958, the Barnhart's youngest daughter took sick and passed away. Mrs. Barnhart sold the cottages and 1 acre of their land to the city in 1968. This was the same purchase that included the Ocean Wave, and the Ocean Wave and Pavilion were torn down in 1968. The second notable pavilion still stands in Lakeview Park, and it is approaching its 100th birthday. In the early 1920s, the Board of Parks Commission decided to build a new pavilion that would contain a restaurant and a dance hall in Lakeview Park. The contract for the building was awarded to the J.W. Trick Company, and construction of the pavilion cost $13,975. The building would be owned by the city, but leased to different companies. The Jubilee was open for business on June 30th, 1927. However, the official opening was Dominion Day, July 1st, 1927. The name of the pavilion was chosen to commemorate Canada's Diamond Jubilee, 60 years of Confederation. But over the years, The name for the Jubilee has shortened, and it is known more often than not by the locals as simply the Jube. The original cost of the pavilion only covered the exterior. In the 1920s and 1930s, the pavilion was only open during the summer months, with dancing 6 nights of the week. In the late 1940s, people began leaving the city for the summer to cottages or traveling. This resulted in a decreased attendance at the Jube. The city then chose to winterize the building, thus enabling it to be used all year round. It was reported to have some of the best dance floors in all of Ontario. In September of 1931, after a dance known as the Midnight Frolic, the Jubilee Pavilion suffered a devastating fire. According to the Oshawa Daily Times, a cigarette butt that was carelessly thrown near the orchestra platform caused the fire. Within 6 minutes, the fire department arrived and began extinguishing the blaze. The damage was in the $10,000 range. The Jubilee was eventually restored and opened again for business. The Jube has had numerous managers through the years. In the 1930s, one of those operators was a man named Owen McCrohan. He was the father of a man named Gerald McCrohan, better known as Jerry Edmonton, and Dennis Eugene McCrohan, better known as Mars Bonfire, 2 of the founding members of Steppenwolf. By the mid-1980s, the Central Lions Club signed a long-term lease and took over operations. The Central Lions Club is responsible for many of the present-day renovations, such as the brick facade, a large kitchen, a new snack bar, a stage, better electrical facilities, modern sound and lighting systems, plus the Lakeview Room, where the walls are lined with photos taken during the 60 years of the Jube, and that was as reported in 1988. And finally, the Jube has been host to many events. These events range from hosting bands, such as the Glenn Miller Orchestra to Rush, to swing dances. There were also many a bingo night being held when it was operated by the Central Lions Club. Unfortunately, due to a loss in revenue, the last bingo game was held in January of 1999. The Jube is now leased by a private company who operates the snack bar and restaurant while offering the pavilion for events like community meetings and weddings. Now, we can't talk about Lakeview Park without talking about the beach. Here are just a few of the memories shared from Lakeview Memories. Lyman Elmer Eady, quote, "We used to take turns swimming, building sandcastles, and riding the ocean wave. Then we used to go up the hill to the park and enjoy our picnic lunch on a table, if available, or on a car rug on the ground." From Linda Bazowski, quote, "We had inner tubes for water play, but we could only use them if our parents or an adult supervised us." Betty McAnally, quote, "There were swings, slides, teeter-totters, and acrobatic bars to play on. Canoes and rowboats could be rented at Barnharts." Bessie Gordon shared, "Our bathing costumes were much more modest than they are today. It was always fun to have a day at the lake." Finally, Douglas Mackey, "I remember 2 lifeguards along the lakefront. Their names were Gordon Sloan Sr. and Jim Everett. Big Jim Everett learned how to swim in South Africa, and I remember him entering the 21-mile swim." In 1996, a woman named Marjorie Lowry donated a photograph album filled with these amazing images of Lakeview Park in the 1930s. The photographs are a glimpse into the lives of a group of friends who spent the summer of 1938 at the lake. They can be seen playing on the beach, joking around with one another, and just enjoying Lakeview Park. Here is just a small sampling of some of our favorite images. And if you follow us on social media, you know I have been sharing these images all throughout the summer. If I can point out the one of the 3 girls going down the slide, you can see the shadow of the photographer, and you can see that his arms are being held at waist length, at waist height, and that's the way that the camera took the pictures back in those days. I just think it's kind of neat that we've got both the subjects as well as a form of a photographer in there. And of course, we've got more paintings from Eric Sanguine, and whenever I can use an Eric Sanguine painting, I'm going to use it. So the statue and the controversy. One of the most notable and at times controversial features of Lakeview Park is the fountain, featuring a sculpture of a young girl. Known affectionately as the Lady of the Lake, the sculpture was erected in an illuminating pool donated by General Motors of Canada and was originally located in the southwest corner of the park. We are grateful to Dale Thiessen of Whitby Stafford Monuments, who provided some additional details from his records about the sculpture and the fountain. It was Dale's father, Charles, and grandfather, Ernest Stafford, that supplied the sculpture for the installation. Originally known as the Pool of Dreams, the fountain features a 4-foot-high statue of a young girl leaning on a rock and is made of Carrara marble, named for the region of Italy from where it came. The sculpture was carved in Italy and arrived by ship to the port of Montreal on February 16, 1959. The total cost for the project was $3,389, and that is in 1959 dollars, which included the sculpture, pool construction, fountain assembly, design, and tablet inscription. The official pool and statue dedication in May 1959 was marked with some controversy when some residents of the community felt that the statue should have included some clothing. Still, the statue continued to grace its corner of the park for more than 40 years, eventually retiring its jets of water to become a flower garden. In 2001, the fountain was given a new lease on life when it was moved from its original location just to the west of the Jubilee Pavilion to grace a place of pride within the Oshawa Museum precinct of Lakeview Park. A new pool was constructed, and once again, jets of water sprayed over the young girl. Today, the Lady of the Lake continues to delight the many visitors to Lakeview Park, as she has done for more than 60 years. And I kind of like this story, the disappearance of the plaque. These blue and gold provincial plaque program, it was established over 60 years ago by the Ontario Heritage Trust, commemorating notable people, places, and events, and the number of plaques across the province is close to 1,300 and growing. One of Oshawa's 2 plaques is located in Lakeview Park. The other one, I believe, is located up at Parkwood. But this one here in the park commemorates Oshawa-born Premier Gordon Conant, and it reads, "The Honourable Gordon D. Conant, 1885 to 1953. Ontario's 12th Prime Minister, was born in Oshawa and educated at the University of Toronto and Osgoode Hall. A practicing lawyer, he was a leader in civic affairs, and in 1916 to 1917 served as mayor of Oshawa. During the following years, he held various municipal offices, and in 1937 was elected to the provincial legislature as a Liberal member for the riding of Ontario. He was appointed Attorney General that year for the administration of the Honourable Mitchell F. Hepburn, and, on the latter's resignation in 1942, succeeded him as Prime Minister. Mr. Conant resigned in 1943 and became Master of the Supreme Court of Ontario." Now, the Gordon Conant plaque was unveiled in Lakeview Park, west of the Jube, on July 20th, 1966. The event was very well attended, with dignitaries like Verna Conant, Gordon's wife, former Premier Leslie Frost, Albert V. Walker, who was our MPP at the time, Michael Starr, our Member of Parliament, and Mayor Lyman Gifford. At the event, Gifford remarked, quote, "I don't know if the general public is aware of it, but he was responsible for the planting of at least 80% of these trees. He liked to get things done," end quote. Less than a month later, however, the plaque was discovered stolen. Amateur diver Robert Bob Stevenson recovered the plaque from 26 feet of water in the Oshawa Harbor by a very happy accident. According to the Oshawa Times, quote, "At first he didn't realize what he had found, But later he and his wife checked the Oshawa Times and learned that this was the stolen plaque. I was quite fortunate the water was so clear. It only happens about every 6 months, Mr. Stevenson said. End quote. In 2001, the plaque was moved once more, although this time the move was sanctioned. Another program of the Ontario Heritage Trust is the commemoration of the Premier's gravesites, and in 2000, the Union Cemetery received an Ontario flag and plaque marking the final resting place of Conant, and this location change of the blue and gold plaque coincided with this. It didn't have far to move, as the plaque was moved to the vicinity of the Oshawa Museum houses, where it remains to this day. For several decades, the lakefront was dotted with cottages, all of which came down by the 1980s. And that's actually a fairly common question that we get asked here at the museum is, were there other houses down here? Yes, there were. As part of the Lakefront Memories Project, a number of participants shared their recollections of the cottages. From Helen Hill, quote, "I was born in one of the cottages, Cottage 325, 1931. Our cottage was built in 1925, and at the time it had no indoor plumbing. It was a typical cottage, 3 rooms, 2 bedrooms, and a sitting room. Eventually, when I was about 4 or 5, we had plumbing put in, a living room, a huge dining room, a porch, kitchen, a bedroom, and hardwood flooring. It was home." End quote. Linda Bazowski, "I remember the cottages very well and lived in 2 of them. The first one was 355 Lakeshore Road. It was the last house on the north side. Next to our cottage stood the danger sign and the harbor and stone piles." Audrey L. Baker also shared, "My rent for the cottage was $28 per month. I spent 2 years there and 2 winters. We moved in 1963, and the new tenant had to pay $30 per month. The address there was 303 Lakeshore Road. The summers were pleasant, the water was clean. The winters were tough." And then this photograph is from our David Doutley photograph collection. Looking a little bit more at the landscape of the park today. We're going to start with the Ritson pear trees. And the Henry House Gardens is the home of 2 Ritson pear trees grown from scions of an original tree owned by John Ritson. John and Mary Ritson moved to Lot 9 on Concession 1. Mr. W. E. Wellington, the Ritson's grandson, provided this origin story to the 1914 Fruits of Ontario publication, which was issued by the Department of Agriculture of Ontario. Quote, "It was my grandmother, Mrs. John Ritson, who planted the seeds from a pear which had been sent to her by a relative in Boston. The tree has always stood on my grandfather's homestead as long as I can remember." End quote. The tree grew successfully and many admired it, and you can see that from the photo on the right. The 1914 publication described it as, quote, "strong, healthy, upright grower. The original tree is now of immense size, probably over 30 feet high, and about 100 years old. An annual bearer of nice, evenly formed fruit." End quote. In 1980, the Ontario Honor Roll of Trees placed the 165-year-old tree on its list, but later in the decade, the tree was felled after it became too dangerous. At the urging of Mr. Earl Han, who was, as you heard earlier in this presentation, he was really important to the Oshawa Historical Society. Our Volunteer of the Year award is named after him. He was also a charter member. At his urging, professional nurserymen grafted scions from the original, and eventually the Oshawa Museum acquired 2 of them, which was paid for by Mr. Han. They were planted in the museum's gardens in 2001, where they continue to thrive today. In the spring of 2000, the museum applied to Trees Ontario, nominating their Ritson pears for heritage tree status, and that was achieved 1 year later in 2011. Trees Ontario presented us with a certificate and tags for the trees. The trees are now listed on the Heritage Trees online database as a recognized heritage tree. And I believe at the last check, we are the only heritage tree in Durham region, so we're quite pleased with it. Another feature of the park is located at the very western edge of the park, which is Oshawa's oldest cemetery, the Port Oshawa Pioneer Cemetery. It was originally located just east of the present-day harbor. It was easily recognizable in North Oshawa when driving down Harmony Road or Grandview Avenue by the ring of trees surrounding it. According to the grave markers, the first burial was that of Nancy Henry, the mother of Thomas Henry in 1816, but there is speculation that burials might have occurred as early as 1800s. In the early 1970s, it was decided that the cemetery would have to be moved to facilitate harbor expansion. In 1974, negotiations began to move the cemetery to Bonnie Brae Point at the corner of Cluane and Birchcliff Avenues. In 1975, the remains of 195 individuals, as well as 60 grave markers, were removed to their new location on Bonnie Brae Point by the Riverside Cemetery Company of Western Ontario. Unfortunately, records for the cemetery were destroyed in a fire many years ago, which has made it a little difficult to ascertain truly who these people are who are buried. With the use of coffin plates, stone grave markers, and some thorough research, a number of identities have been established, and as of January 2013, which I think was one of the last times I really had time to dig into the history of the cemetery, we knew the names of 124 of the just over 200 individuals who are buried there. Many of Oshawa's earliest European settlers are buried there, including members of the Henry, Robinson, and Guy families, and Benjamin Wilson. Poor Benjamin Wilson has actually been interred 3 different times. He was buried first on his property upon his death in 1821, but he was moved to the Harbor Cemetery in 1851. And at that time, a marble tombstone was placed on his grave. During the removal of the cemetery in 1975, it was noted that his original tombstone was missing, and we placed a memorial stone, we being the Oshawa Historical Society, we placed a memorial stone in 1987 to commemorate his burial spot. It is once again located up on a bluff, and according to the plaque in the cemetery, the choice of this bluff, quote, ensures that the waves of Lake Ontario will continue to sound a requiem to the early settlers and their progeny here interred. And finally, I'm just going to share 2 quick lakefront memories about the cemetery. First, from Helen Hill. There are Smiths buried at the Pioneer Cemetery. Some do not have headstones. The Smiths lived in the area since the 1800s. Not all of the headstones were moved to the new location. My father was upset about that. My great-grandfather was Captain Smith. My great-great-grandfather was Abram Smith. Abram Smith's stone is in the cemetery. Captain Jackson Smith's name is on the large board in the cemetery on Bonnie Brae Point. Abram's wife's headstone is there too, along with one of his daughters. And finally, Betty McAnally appears to be a distant relative of Helen Hill because she shares, Abram and Caroline Smith, my great-grandparents, and my ancestors are buried on the hill. 3 of my mother's siblings were buried there, as well as her grandfather, Andrew Jackson Smith, her grandmother, Ellen Hill, and my aunts, uncles, and cousins. And finally, I can't talk about Lakeview Park without bringing it back home to us. The 3 houses that make up the Oshawa Museum are 3 of the oldest remnants from the earliest history of the park. All 3, Robinson, Henry, and Guy, are on their original foundations, meaning that they are standing where they were built, and they date to the 1840s to 1850s. We see some connections with these early inhabitants as well to the harbor, with Thomas serving as harbor master in the early 1850s, succeeded by James Guy, and a Robinson in-law, Richard Welsh, lived in Robinson House, and he was a customs officer. As many of you know, the museum's early beginnings are with Henry House, which first opened as the Henry House Museum in 1960. In 1969, Robinson House Museum opened. By the 1980s, they were operating under the United name Sydenham Museum. the name a nod to the first name of the harbor. Guy House was added to the complex by 1985. Several decades later, and a few name changes later, the Oshawa Museum is a thriving organization dedicated to sharing the history of our community. We are hoping to eventually change the landscape of the park once again with the addition of a purpose-built museum facility, which will enable the museum to continue to provide exhibits and programs while allowing our collecting capacities to grow, meeting all standards set by museum associations. And with that, thank you all so much for listening. One thing that we didn't quite address is how we were going to handle questions, because I'm more than happy to field questions if there are any. Perhaps we can use either the chat function, and that way we can, answer any questions that come up. Yes, I see Marjorie Sorrell has your hand raised. Yeah, if you'd like, you can unmute yourself and you can ask the question.
Tell me how many acres? I think I once heard it was similar to the size of the CNE. Is that correct?
Oh, the total acreages of Lakeview Park currently.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, not sure off the top. That is a really good question, and I will post the answer in our Facebook group and on Twitter. I'll post it on social media, but unfortunately, I don't know the exact size of it today, but that is a very good question. Thank you. Oh, according to Jill, 44 acres. I knew someone was going to pipe up. Thank you, Jill. And Merle and Mary Ellen Cole in the chat have asked, does anyone remember an archery club in the park?
Lisa, Joe Ballowhood of Ballowhood Sports Haven, I believe, was the one who had set up the archery club, and it ran for a number of years. I believe in the 60s and probably late 50s, early 60s. And I was just wondering if anyone else had taken part in that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I can safely say I did not do archery here in the park. But that is a really great memory. Thank you.
Lisa, on that original map that showed the Henry plot of land, the north border of that, is that Bloor Street?
Yes. Yes, Bloor was also sometimes known as Baseline, and that was the dividing line between the Broken Front concession and Concession 1.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you for asking the question. Are there any other questions? Okay. Well, with that, once again, I am going to thank each and every one of you for joining us this evening. Again, this is our first foray into holding this by Zoom, and it looks like it's probably going to be our reality for the next little while. I'm going to be making the presentation part of this available on YouTube. We will also have the recording of the AGM available for anyone who does want to watch afterwards. With that, once again, like I said, thank you all so much for joining. Our next meeting will be the third Tuesday of October. I believe it's October 20th. And Laura and I were just chatting about the topic, and we're still going to be finalizing that in the next couple days. But again, it will be the museum staff leading next month's topic. So thank you all so much. If you have any feedback, shoot me an email. We do appreciate that. It will only help us make this better going forward. Stay safe, stay healthy, everyone. Thank you all once again for spending the Tuesday night with us, and I hope you enjoy the evening. Good night.